Welcome, and thank you for tuning in to Spiritual Wake Up Call. I am your host, Marilyn Tennant, and I am so honored to have the intelligent, wise human being, Scott Austin Martin, who is a very well-informed student of life, licensed professional counselor that brings so much knowledge and wisdom to his clients, and he is bringing that wisdom here in this episode today. It is part one of our conversation because we have gotten so deep into the many topics here, including masculine feminine dynamics, including cognitive behavioral method, including somatic method. It's just so many breakthroughs, a lot of aha moments for me, and it's exactly why I decided to start this podcast. It's something that I've just been meditating on for actually a really long time now and thinking about whether I wanted to dive into it. And now that I have started it, I am just so excited for so many possibilities. And this episode is just the perfect way to get it kicked off. So without further ado, we are going to get right into it. Thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome. Get ready to open your minds, open your hearts, and see what's inside.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Spiritual Wake Up Call. And I am just so excited today because I get to talk to my friend Scott Austin Martin, who is a licensed professional counselor. He is also licensed in neuromuscular massage therapy, Reiki, Shakti. Am I pronouncing that right? Massage, Shakti. Yep. So somatic processing, as well as EFR, EMDR, TRE, SRI, completion process, Sedona method, the Tony Robbins trained strategic intervention transformation coach, a human needs psychology, transformation, and generational childhood and past relationship trauma. And as you can see, this is just somebody that is so well qualified, well studied into speaking into exactly what speaks to my heart and why I want to do this podcast. And he was gracious enough to agree to come on and speak with me. And I just want to thank you so much and welcome you.
Hi, thanks for having me on. Absolutely. And that was a great intro, but it also sounds like a really, really tall pedestal to fall off of as well. a lot of acronyms in there. They kind of sort of confusing me just hearing you say it.
Well, I just wanted to, note it's noteworthy, and I know it shows of the studies that you put into it and the level of seriousness that you put into healing and helping people, because it seems like it's really a lifelong endeavor. How long would you say you've been on this spiritual journey, this journey of higher learning, so to speak?
Well, that is like, how much time do we have?
I know that's a loaded question.
You mean this lifetime? Is that what we're talking about? It's been, I'm 52 years old, about to be 53 in June. It seems like I've been on this path in some way or another in a lot of different layers for a really long time. And there's a really, close journey to my professional life and my spiritual life and my family life and things along those lines. There's a lot of similarities and crossroads that come with that as well.
Which that is awesome to do, because I've lived a life myself where my spiritual journey wasn't necessarily in congruence with my professional life, and which is, I'm a nurse by trade. So there's so many different fields to go into nursing. And that, I would have to say, was when I was at my most miserableness, when there was no cohesion between the two lives. And I did have to do some counseling at some point, when really the answer seemed to be within me, was that, I have the answer, and it's what makes me happy, and it's follow your joy, right? And if you're not happy in your certain job, then you need to look at that and see if that's the right job for you. but we can go on, and I'm just excited to find out what what the goal of this conversation is going to be about. And we spoke a little bit about it beforehand and found some interest. And I just was really interested in when you mentioned masculine and feminine dynamics in psychology and trauma healing. So what would you say is your favorite niche in psychology? Would it be working with that, or?
Sure. I think that when you say, favorite niche, I think that there's layers, and it's kind of like, pyramid that you get, closer and closer and a part of, what your biggest passions are, kind of the tip of the point. But I would say that understanding that we have moved into a new age of how we approach trauma treatment, that we're moving out of the cognitive behavioral mindset type of age, and we're moving more into a soma of the body. The body keeps score. That the golden mental emotional rule is that there are no painful thoughts. A thought creates a cascade of neurological activity that's broadcast somewhere in the body, and if you can shift the way the body is holding that charge, then it's just a story. It always was just a story. And often the way that we hold memory, especially traumatic memories, has to do with a charge. And if you can kind of remove that charge, then there's a freedom, there's a freshness, and our bodies are actually designed to do that. It's just that most people are using these amazing abstract human brains to be in a story, and even cognitive, frequently we're reflecting and being up in the story. I would say one of the biggest issues is I have people that are the most intelligent frequently are the ones that suffer the most because they're so good at arguing with themselves. So a big part of my job is to show people how to come out of the story and into the present moment. And one of the greatest foundations for coming out of the story is to focus on something that's going on with the body, because the body is here now. And it's normally representing what the actual experience of an individual is, if you understand the patterns, if you understand the mechanisms. And so a large part of my job is truly coaching people to show them the mechanisms so they can go, well, where do I fit in this, and how do I use this understanding in order to get where I want to be? So that's
Absolutely.
a very, very quick nickel tour of where I think we are as a society. We're evolving in a lot of different directions at the same time. And there's so many amazing people on the planet that are coming up with new ways for us to heal. And for every one thing that I discover, honestly, it points to about 99 that I don't know about yet.
Yeah.
So what part of that would you like us to jump off
into?
Oh
my goodness. Well, I think that grabs me the most is you brought up the cognitive behavioral method, which was in my area anyways, in Michigan is where I live. And I think it represents a large amount in the same in other parts of the country, that cognitive behavior therapy was really something that was the mainstream in psychology. For instance, I went through a divorce, and we tried with counseling for 2 years at least of counseling. And it seemed like most methods were cognitive behavior. And honestly, it felt like a gaslight to the body. Like it was just like we're speaking on congruence again, congruence between your professional life, congruence between your personal life, how you live behind doors and in the public. How do you live with, how is what you're speaking reflecting what's in your heart and in your mind is what you're doing. So it's all congruent. So with cognitive behavioral method, it would be with, at least in the terms of marital counseling, when he comes in the room, you have to kiss him every time, whether or not you want to strangle him instead. I'm like, wait a minute, can we talk about the fact that I'd rather strangle him? Because if we're not talking about that, then we're gaslighting ourselves. And like you said, there's a connection between your body, how it's wired, and what would you speak? How would you have to speak on that idea? Do you think that the body has an intelligence as much as the mind that we in the cognitive behavioral method isn't paying attention to?
Well, let's make sure that we kind of look at the whole picture for a moment. Cognitive behavioral therapy actually is very efficacious. It's just there's reasons why it doesn't work. And there's also reasons why what's actually occurring is not actually cognitive behavioral therapy either. Because a lot of times what people are experiencing is they're experiencing a counselor that's giving them reflective listening based off of their own biases. And one of the issues with that is that most of us that are in this industry, and most healing arts industry, by the way, we come to this, we're drawn to this because we come from some form of trauma. That's how you get drawn into this particular industry. And if you haven't done, and I'm going to say this very boldly, if you haven't done extreme somatic work of some sort to shift the way the body is holding, the chances are you're a therapist with trauma that's walking around trying to help other people with trauma. And there's all very, very predictable aspects of transference that can begin happening with that. But let's look at the root of cognitive therapy. Like, what is it that actually works? Like, these are questions we need to ask. What works? What doesn't work? What's next? The root of cognitive therapy is understanding that we have a thought, right? And the thought is a neurotransmitter, goes to the hypothalamus where it creates a neuropeptide, releases through the pituitary gland, travels through the autonomic nervous system to a plexus of nerves, normally a hormonal center of some sort, where it broadcasts a signal that we know as an emotion. So the thought does create, but the thought is not painful. It creates a cascade of neurological activity where there's then a felt sense of pain or uncomfortability in the body. And so that, like, if you didn't have the body to represent that, then, you wouldn't experience it to the same kind of degree. Plus the fact that we have this incredibly advanced abstract mind that can be in an abstract version of the future, an abstract version of the past, an abstract version of now, where we're thinking about what everybody else is thinking, doing, and saying, and none of it has to be true. We haven't even left the couch yet, but yet we're still experiencing, all these things in the body. So it's powerful for us to ask certain questions of cognitive therapy, because the root of cognitive therapy is going up to that thought and asking, is it true? Is the thought true? But then that thought's going to create an emotion. And often when we're presented with a client that has a certain emotion, the emotion's not wrong, even if it's backed by a thought that's creating it. So one of the things that a lot of modern day therapists really fail at is meeting people where they're at and what they feel before they even get close to being able to ask what is true. And so if you've got somebody that's asking you what's true without meeting you where you're at, there's not going to be any rapport. There's not going to be a connection. And the number one reason why any type of therapy works, the number one, doesn't matter what type of therapy, is the person feels understood. That is the number one reason. So we are moving into an age of somatic processing where we are teaching people how to observe themselves in such a way on a multitude of different levels and dimensions to understand themselves. That is like we're even bypassing some of that to where we don't need therapists and reflection as much as we need people that can coach you. This is the way that you walk through a door. This is the way that you start paying attention to yourself in very specific ways. And we've got to come out of the story. And so I would ask a couple of questions of anybody out there. If you wanted to be really, really good at something, like, I know that you play guitar. You want to be really, really good at playing guitar. What do you have to do?
Practice.
If you want to be really good at playing tennis, what would you have to do? Have that amazing muscle memory backhand. What would you do? If you want to be really, really present and not lost in a story of trauma or a story of suffering, what do you have to do? And that's why one of the pillars of my coaching is practice presence, mindfulness, presence. There's dozens, thousands of different ways to actually do that, but learning how to be with what's here, not just what's up here in this story as well. So I don't know if I answered your question about how cognitive is not working and why it's not working. There are reasons why it does work, but we need to ask bigger questions. And those questions are, why does it not work? In fact, if you're like a lot of people in this industry that are beginning to move, and what we're seeing therapists that have been mostly cognitive that in the last 2 to 5 years are beginning to add EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, EFT, emotion focus, emotion freedom technique. We're beginning to understand more attachment theory, how that works and the way that it plays out within the body. Attachment theory has been with us since the 1950s, right? In the 1970s, and this should piss most people off just a little bit, At the University of Chicago, there was a Dr. Eugene Ginlin. They got a bunch of psychotherapists together, and he asked a question. The question that he asked was, why does psychotherapy not work when it doesn't work? Isn't that a wonderful question? It's just a fantastic next level question. And what they did is they began looking at the sessions, and they began listening, and instead of looking at quantitative data, they began looking at the qualitative data, and they realized that people that tended to get better had a quality, a characteristic, and people that tended to not get better did not have that quality. And then they said, well, can we teach people how to have that quality, and will it predict them getting better? And the answer was yes. So what was that quality, right? The quality was, whatever your story of suffering is, if you could effectively get in touch with the felt sense of that story in the body, that ability to get in touch with the felt sense predicted that psychotherapy would be successful for you. 1970s, we knew this, and they created a program called Focusing. There's a cool little book I'd recommend everyone put in their library. We've now discovered so many other ways, though. We've got somatic respiratory integration, breath work. So what we're doing is you have to understand, the human brain has an advanced prefrontal cortex with an advanced abstract reasoning, right? We have an advanced imagination. We have an advanced memory. And if we're mentally, emotionally suffering, you can guarantee that means that we're in a story and we're not in the now. We're in the story of what is. We're not paying attention to what is. And in the story, that's where we're creating suffering for ourselves. And just very simple example. I'm a dog lover. I don't know if you are or not, but I heard dog, like in the post-COVID, post-Zoom, if you don't have a dog in the background, you're probably not human.
Right.
Right? My dog has a memory of 18 to 20 seconds. He doesn't have a forehead, right? So although he can learn anxiety from me, from a human, or from instinct and from behavioral conditioning, right? He doesn't have the same abstract reasoning where we can go into a nightmare that isn't even true, and our body's going to reflect that in some way as well. So anyway, we were talking about trauma also, and I think masculine and feminine energy. What direction interests you most on those?
I really am interested in the trauma and learning more about what you've learned through your work in the masculine feminine dynamic and how it's playing out in today's world. And I know that's a really broad subject, but there's so many avenues that we can go down. But I just wanted to touch and see where you want to feel that out, because it's something that is affecting a lot of people, whether they realize it or not. So,
right.
How do you feel about that?
Right. So when we talk, and there's metaphors that we use when we talk about, for example, masculine, feminine energy, you have to have certain disclaimers up front. We're living in a day with over 70 different pronouns for, gender, and nobody can tell you necessarily what your orientation or who you are, right? So immediately we have to do some disclaimers on what we're talking about, to where if you look at like a bell curve, like a normal distribution, you've got your main thrust that typically is heterosexual, but then you have your outliers of, say, trans or, homosexual. And trauma plays a weird game with a lot of this, also, because when we're talking about characteristics, we're talking about energy, we're talking about characteristics. We're not necessarily talking about your sexual orientation or your gender. Again, nobody can tell you who you are. But in my niche, right? And I say niche because I have a really good friend that deals more with, the gay and the trans, community. And we have a lot of conversations, and then I refer to her and I get more of the heterosexual. So a part of this is what's your niche. So we want to kind of make that disclaimer. If part of the pattern that we're talking to you about doesn't feel right for you, well, then by all means, I'm the first one that's going to ask people to be a soul scientist, where you figure out what's truth for you and don't let anybody, get in the way of your self-discovery, of what that is. At the same time, it's very helpful to have a lot of mirrors and metaphors and patterns that we can look at and go, hey, do I fit, in that pattern, right? So that's what we're talking about. We're talking about a pattern that's very, very common, but it's not all encompassing, okay? So when we talk about masculine and feminine energy, one of these patterns, masculine energy is an external pattern as a metaphor, while feminine energy is an internal pattern. Okay. And so as an internal pattern, I'm going to throw out some metaphors that you have to see whether they feel right for you or not. Feminine energy is 10 times more powerful than masculine energy. And the reason is because it's a creative energy, right? Like, I can give my wife sperm, but she can actually grow a baby. This is the difference between masculine and feminine energy in the biological, right? And so she's got that internal energy. And, metaphors for that is that a woman has a circle, a womb, a nest, a circle of influence. And if she is in her flow of who she actually is as an authentic woman, she will naturally nurture everything that's within that circle. Like, that's who she actually is. But we're living in a time where there's some really common patterns that I deal with over and over and over again that play out in relationships. And one of those is where you see a woman who was taught very, very early that no one would protect her heart. So she had to do it for herself, right? And so she had to go into masculine energy. Now, one of the really unique aspects of that is that women are really good at going mama bear. Women are really good at being in masculine energy. In fact, I would even say boldly that we're living in a world where women are better at being men than men are currently. And there may be some people that disagree with that, but that's what I found in the work of couples that I basically deal with. And so what's the flip of that? What's the flip of masculine energy? Well, masculine energy is an external energy. So while feminine energy takes small things and makes them grow, masculine energy takes big things and makes them small, so that we can we can create and defend a container, a safety aspect, right? So what is a man's job in a relationship? Well, it's to create a container of safety for a woman, right? So when a man normally in childhood is either modeled or he goes through an experience of trauma. And what I mean by modeled is, we now know that children of Holocaust survivors are prone to PTSD and anxiety. Obviously, they were not in the concentration camps. They did not go through the same traumas, but they were modeled the triggers from those traumas. And in that way, we are literally passing on the traumas, and each of us are inheriting the traumas of our parents. And there's a lot more that we can even talk about this in human development, where we talk about, what brainwave we're in between the ages of 2 and 7, where we're at 8, and how that plays out on what we're going to attract. And this is the part that's really interesting for relationships, is generally, I can say without hesitating, that we are attracted mentally, emotionally, spiritually, energetically to the mates that we end up connecting with, because they can help us heal our generational, childhood, and past relationship wounds. And the way that they do that, are you ready for this? Is they will trigger every single one of those wounds. And so it's a mirror, right? It's a mirror that's going to show you pain. Pain is a guide, right? Suffering is a choice. Pain is a guide, but only always, right? So the question is can we read the mirror and listen and learn from that wisdom of pain? Because it'll actually show you, at least somatically in the body, exactly where you're holding what and how you're holding what, and what you need to do in order to do what. Decrease the density of how your body is holding something to protect you, and move back into a safe state of flow. So when we talk about trauma, I'm using that word very, very loosely to describe a lot of certain mechanisms, but that have a large degree. And so that's everything from, I didn't get what I wanted for my 7-year birthday party, to, I lost my best friend in front of me, got blown up in Afghanistan. We're talking about anything that takes us out of flow. And I define flow, and there's a lot of extreme sports way to describe flow, but flow is a state of being where it takes minimal to no effort for us to be us. Doesn't that sound nice?
Yeah.
So like we're generally born into that state, unless we're born in wartime, or like almost immediately after we come out. And what I do is I use a coffee cup. I don't have one here locally, but I'm a coffee drinker. I use the J-O of joy, cup of Joe, J-O of joy, the E of ease to describe kind of a cup of coffee, right?
Yeah.
And as we're born here. Okay, we're born in this life, we're in a state of flow, right? Cup of Joe, bliss. And then almost immediately we're hit with the illusions. We're hit with the suffering. We're hit with the generational trauma, to where something tries to pour out our Joe, right? And so we don't want to pour out our Joe. So we upregulate, dysregulate. We basically move into some form of fight, flight, freeze, disassociation, disconnection, right? And so now we do this to do what? We do it to protect ourselves. That's the origin of all of that, always, right? So we move into this state of dysregulation, and it gives us control. And we like control. And if we stay up here in this place of control, well, neurology is now teaching us that neurons that fire together wire together. So instead of being in kind of this place of flow, we're up here in this dysregulated state. And that becomes our new norm. That becomes our homeostasis. And what if that was someone's homeostasis 3 generations, and then they're modeling the triggers from that dysregulation also? And we see these patterns that just kind of the trauma train that keeps kind of playing out until somebody brings very specific aspects of consciousness to this process, which, we can be aware of something. So awareness is one level of consciousness. I'm aware that I got some issues in my childhood, but I'm gonna go have this beer or whatever, right? As opposed to acknowledge. And acknowledge means we have to actually look at it, right? So part of my job is I teach people how to look at something, how to come in from different perceptions to see something other than kind of the normal perceptions that we've been kind of looking from. And I really like the metaphor of 2 dimensions, 3 dimensions, because normally when people are suffering, it's because the state of suffering means I don't have enough information to escape this state of being. And so what is it we need? We need information. And so we're only getting maybe 2 perspectives. So the moment that we introduce a 3rd perspective, for example, in breath work, we're introducing awareness of breath. We're introducing awareness of body, as opposed to just being up here in the story. We've introduced another perception. And as we move from 3D, just a 3rd perception, well, we've now gone from flat to a cube. And we've now potentially, instead of being stuck, we now have a way to flow through that was always there that we just never felt before because we didn't have the information. And I don't know if there's a better metaphor for what trauma work is it's learning how to come in from different perceptions so that you're using all of the dimensional resources that our abstract, advanced human minds actually have the ability to access. And when we do, flow is natural. Like it's an organic process. Like we're designed to downregulate. I will make this bold claim. We have the psychological technology now to completely eradicate mental, emotional issues, except in, quite honestly, organic deficiencies like brain damage, as well. And even then, with how we condition the brain and what we've learned in neurology and neuroplasticity, we can still greatly enhance quality of life. The problem is that we're living in a society that's not normalizing that. It's normalizing trauma. And that from what we've learned in research and its implementation in mainstream America, we're looking at 15 to 20 years, and people are falling through that gap and they're dying and they're suffering and they're living. And it's time that we collectively, so if you are someone that is drawn to any of this work, we want to make sure that we're giving all of the recommendations and Google, because there's so much information now out there. It's kind of insane. If you truly want to heal and get to a place of flow, that process is available to you. Now the question is what are you going to attract that's going to be the best process? And honestly, there's a lot of processes. You yourself are a breathwork facilitator. I can't recommend that enough. Because what it's technically allowing you to do is it's allowing you to get in touch with the body, be present with it in such a way that the body will take over and actually unwind. And there's a video on YouTube. It's you can Google it. It's about the leopard and the impala. And in this, have you seen that one?
It's great. Yeah, it's a great.
So to give people just a brief synopsis of what's in that video, real quick. Go ahead.
So you have the leopard, and for some reason it didn't get the impala. So the impala was scared out of its wits, of course, almost died. But he went through a shaking, and it's called discharge. It's a discharge. It's a reaction that the body has when all the catecholamines, and it's purely from the bottom up. Instead, we began this conversation speaking on the cognitive level of trauma, how it's up here, but animals in the wild, and like our dogs, what we're talking about, they have only a 20, 30-second memory. It's amazing how it's just a freedom that we kind of lost along with being so intelligent, such intelligent, smart animals that we are living in the head, that we kind of were able to suppress that motion of allowing the catecholamines to take over and do its work of the shaking, because he was able to shake and then go on with his life. Like he didn't completely live back in that trauma again and have that recurring trauma in his mind. So yeah, that's kind of what I'm recreating in breath work. And I know that you do some somatic release processing in trauma as well. There's so many different modalities. It's not just breath work, but I think the breath is the easiest. So you can control your breath work and manipulate a lot of your body processes through it. You can put yourself actually in a fight or flight mode. But when you do it in a facilitated environment with a safe trainer that knows what they're doing, they can create that, like you were talking about, it's a very masculine. Actually, there's a lot of men, that might be why there's a lot of men in this type of modality, but it is a very masculine trait, because you're creating that safe space, right? That the container. And if somebody is in a safe container and you're able to manipulate the body to go back in and reproduce that catecholamine release through what would seem to be a trauma, but it's different, right? You're not actually, your heartbeat's not beating as fast, for one thing. You do have some bioprocesses such as blood pressure changes slightly, but you're laying down, you're in a safe spot. And I shake a lot of the times and I feel so at peace afterwards. I know that I'm safe. That's the biggest part of it. But again, it's so interesting how I'm just now realizing that might speak to as why there's so many men that are leading these kinds of modalities with the breath work, because it comes natural.
Yeah, and I'm pretty vocal about when I work with a lot of men specifically, and one of the digital courses that we've got coming out soon, has to do with rite of passage, the mechanisms of masculinity, and the aspect that our job in this world is to protect. It's to create a container of safety. How? Mentally, emotionally, physically, sexually, financially, in all ways. I mean, in all ways. That's our job, because when you create that container of safety, it's not that the woman can't go mama bear. They can, but that's not what they want to be. That's not what they want to do all the time. I mean, it's more like there's a sun that blooms if you create a container for a woman in a relationship where she feels safe, and everybody that's around that sunshine gets to enjoy what we get from sunshine, which is, growth, and, like we get to survive because that kind of energy, is present as well. So it makes a lot of sense why there would be some men, but I've seen some pretty amazing facilitators that were women also, especially in somatorespiratory integration, which breathwork is kind of a component of that, where we're kind of identifying different frequencies of awareness. I mean, we're talking about kind of the two dimensions. So breath is one. And, for your audience here, just very quick kind of exercise I would ask people to do is to take a big giant breath.
Yes.
Like you're filling up your waist all the way, filling up your upper body like a cup all the way to the waist.
Yep.
And then if you really notice, and some people may not be able to notice because of disconnection, disassociation, and we're not saying something's wrong. It's just we want to be present with what's here, but like go inside and notice. And if you'll notice, the breath doesn't just fill up like a cup. If you really pay attention, you'll see that it kind of winds like a lazy river, where there's areas that are more flow and areas that are denser. Is the same true for you?
Yeah, there's definitely, after working with the breath for about a year now, I mean, I've been working my whole life. That's the amazing thing about the breath. You're doing it whether you think about it or not. But when you cognitively think about the breath, you can feel there's some spaces that it moves to. And
so what I would posture there, what I would define there is that visualization of breath is creating a sonogram of how your autonomic nervous system is at this moment. It's literally telling you what is upregulated, what is dysregulated, where you have flow. And a part of somatorespiratory integration is we're going to use the breath as one component, and then we're going to localize to where we're in flow, and then we're going to breathe a couple, and then we're going to localize to where we're in density, and then we're going to localize to where we're in flow, and then we're going to localize to where we're in density. And what happens is the consciousness gets confused. It's like you're connecting two different air pressures, a low and a high air pressure, and there is a reorganizational healing where resources begin to be shared because they're having a neural communication on a sub level that has nothing necessarily to do with, so we're using the triad of change, focus, language, and structure, but we're using it in a specific way. And breath is only one of the frequencies of awareness. Another one is touch, so as a neuromuscular massage therapist,
that is our first episode of Spiritual Wake Up Call. I am so thankful for you joining us and taking part in this lovely conversation with Scott Austin Martin. We touched on a lot of topics, and we're going to go in deeper and speak more on somatic release and the connection with the mind, body, soul, and psychology next week. Our episodes will air at 4 p.m. Friday, so be sure to tune in. And if you're interested, you can join me in a somatic release breathwork class at www.marylandtennant.com.